Hello everyone and welcome to this edition of GroupTalk. Today you'll be learning about addressing regulatory requirements for instant messaging. You'll be hearing from Rafael Gomez, the VP of Sales of North America, and Ken Gartner, our Director of Development here at GBS. Without further ado, here's Rafael.
Hi there. This is Rafael Gomez. Thank you for joining us today. Just to start as an introduction, I just wanted to say that for years IM usage in the enterprise was mostly sporadic and found on public systems such as MSN, Messenger, and Yahoo. As concerns arose regarding the security of corporate networks and possible leaks of corporate intellectual property, vendors such as IBM released products at the same time to control these risks. IBM eventually made it possible for same-time users to communicate with external users, which essentially connected companies to their customers, partners, and vendors. So instant messaging is now a critical part of the messaging ecosystem at most enterprises, and as such is regulated as a form of communication subject to all the same regulatory compliance requirements as email. And there are no shortage of regulatory bodies to control communication. NASD, FINRA, the SEC, as well as laws like HIPAA, SOX, FRCP Rule 26, as well as many others. The threat of fines, loss of license, and reputation, as well as the impact to businesses, are reasons enough to monitor and control instant messaging. However, there are other threats that we'll look at in today's webinar. So, again, as an introduction, my name is Rafael Gomez, and I'm responsible for GBS Sales in North America. I'll be leading the presentation you hear today, but I'll be joined by Ken Gartner, who is the Director of Development at GBS. Both Ken and I are alumni of one of GBS's acquisitions, Promessa, a company that sold and marketed the GBS products that support customers in the area of IM policy enforcement. Ken has been largely responsible for the creation of the products you'll see demonstrated later today, and will be available for technical follow-up later during the webinar. So let's talk a little bit about how we'll spend our time together. By the end of this hour, we plan to spend some time looking at the history of instant messaging, reviewing the laws that regulate IM, discussing the fundamental regulatory problem those companies using instant messaging systems to run their business face. We'll frame a solution that would address all of the requirements created by these laws, then spend a few minutes looking at the solutions that GBS provides through a demonstration. Lastly, we'll recap and leave some time for questions, and finish with a free trial offer, something everybody loves. I thought it would be interesting to look at the origins of instant messaging, since, to be honest, in my research, I learned a few things. So did you know that IM predates the Internet, first appearing on multi-user operating systems like compatible time-sharing systems, CTSS, and multiplex information and computing service, Multics, and in mid-1960s, believe it or not. Initially, some of these systems were used as notification systems for services like printing, but quickly they were used to facilitate communication with other users logged into the same machine. As networks developed, the protocol spread with the networks, and some of these used a peer-to-peer protocol, some specifically needing talk and YTalk, while others required peers to connect to a server. Talk specifically was a program originally used for live text communication between different users of a single multi-user computer running the Unix operating system. YTalk was the first to allow conversations between more than 2 users, something a little bit more like the instant messaging that we know today. During the bulletin board system phenomenon that peaked in the 1980s, some systems incorporated chat features which were similar to instant messaging. So some of these early instant messaging programs were primarily real-time text where characters appeared as they were typed. This included Talk in particular, the command line program, which was popular in the 70s and the 80s and then later in the 90s. But some of the bulletin board systems chat programs use similar interfaces. Modern internet-wide GUI-based messaging clients, as they're known today, began to take off in the mid-1990s with systems like Powwow, ICQ, and AOL Instant Messenger. Similar functionality was offered by CU-CME in 1992, and it was primarily an audio-video chat link. Users could also send textual messages to each other. AOL later acquired the company that created ICQ. Right? I used ICQ in the 90s. And a few years later, ICQ was awarded 2 patents for instant messaging by the U.S. Patent Office. Meanwhile, other companies developed their own software. Companies like Yahoo, which of course has a popular Yahoo Instant Messenger today, Excite, MSN, Ubique. Each had its own proprietary protocol and client. So users had to run multiple client applications if they wished to use more than one of these networks. In other words, an AOL user couldn't communicate with a Yahoo user. Now, something important happened in 1998. That's the year that IBM released IBM Lotus Sametime, a product based on technology acquired when IBM bought Ubique and Lexington-based DataBeam. And that was really the birth of enterprise instant messaging. The downside of this instant messaging system, as with all the other ones that existed at the time, was that it was still a solution that limited communication to those users within its own installation. So it created a bit of an island within an organization, in this case, companies. But in 2000, an open source application and open standards-based protocol called Jabber was launched. This protocol was standardized under the name Extensible Messaging and Presence Protocol, XMPP. And the nice thing was that XMPP servers could act as gateways to other IM protocols. That reduced, of course, the need to run multiple clients. Multi-protocol clients can use any popular IM protocol by using local libraries for each protocol. Now, IBM was smart enough to employ this protocol, and in November 2007, it released its Sametime Gateway, which supported XMPP. This, of course, opened Sametime up to the outside world. And it was about that time that Microsoft delivered its first version of its enterprise instant messaging system. About 6 or 7 years, 9 years after IBM did. So the birth of the enterprise instant messenger made instant messaging popular in the office, and it grew at a steady clip between 1998 and the mid-2000s. But with the introduction of technology like the Sametime Gateway, customer adoption became significant because suddenly IM was no longer just a means to communicate with colleagues, but also with customers, partners, and vendors. Opening up instant messaging to the outside world also created a risk of non-compliance to laws and regulations governing the use of electronic communications in businesses. In the United States alone, there are over 10,000 laws and regulations related to electronic messaging and records retention. And by the way, I want to acknowledge that we have several Europeans on the call today. This conversation, because it is related to the law, is focused on the United States, but I understand that there are many similar laws in other countries. So the most common regulations related to IM at work involve the need to produce archived business communications to satisfy government or judicial requests under law. Many instant messaging communications fall into the category of business communications that have to be archived and retrievable. However, there are other regulations that prohibit the communication between certain types of individuals within a company, the communication of certain information, statements that forecast certain scenarios, and a lot more. So let's look at a few of these laws. Without a doubt, the best-known regulating bodies in the financial industry, and actually the most regulated industry is probably the financial one. Within that industry, the bodies that I think many of us have heard of are the New York Stock Exchange and NASD, the National Association of Securities Dealers. In 2007, these joined forces and became FINRA, the Financial Industry Regulatory Industry. FINRA is the largest independent regulator for all securities firms doing business in the United States. They oversee nearly 4,500 brokerage firms, 165,000 branch offices, 631,000 registered securities representatives, and their chief role is to protect investors by maintaining the fairness of the U.S. capital markets. Prior to FINRA being established, back when it was just NYSE and New York Stock Exchange and NASD, several regulations that affect electronic communication had already been passed, and these, of course, are still valid today. For example, there is the NASD Rule 2210, which specifically regulates communication with the public, like that which takes place in advertisements, sales literature, correspondence, institutional sales material, and public appearances. Rule 2211 specifically states that correspondence consists of any written letter or electronic message, electronic mail message distributed by a member to either one or more of its existing retail customers, and two, fewer than 25 prospective retail customers within a 30-day calendar period. If it's over 25, it's just considered as advertising, so it's still regulated. However, in a clarification by FINRA that took place in 2007, it was noted that electronic communications, email and electronic correspondence could be used interchangeably and could include such forms of messaging such as instant messaging and text messaging. So instant messaging is definitely covered under this law. The law basically establishes a number of standards related to the content of the communications and advertisings, which basically push for truth in the message. This basically leads to the kind of disclaimer that you often see in many financial communications. The one that states that communications with the public basically can't predict or project performance, imply past performance will recur, or make any kind of exaggerated or unwarranted claim, forecast, or opinion. So besides that rule, there's the NASD Rule 3010 and 3110. This rule specifies or defines the supervision of sales activities, and it establishes that each member shall establish procedures for the review and endorsement by a registered principal in writing on an internal record of all transactions, and for the review by a registered principal of incoming and outgoing written and electronic correspondence of its registered representatives with the public relating to the investment banking and securities business of such members. That's a direct quote. Of course, this implicitly gives authorization to any supervisor at a regulated entity to review electronic correspondence to ensure that it complies with the law. Clearly, it's not possible for a human to review all emails and IM, so it's necessary to automate this process. But more importantly, it puts the supervisor on the hook where there's a violation in the communication with customers, because they were supposed to review it. So not knowing that something was said is not a good defense in the eye of the law. Okay, let's look at one more and then move on. So then there's Sarbanes-Oxley. We've all heard of SOX, Sarbanes-Oxley. The reason for the Sarbanes-Oxley Act of 2002 was a concern that investment banks weren't maintaining quote-unquote Chinese walls between retail brokerage and underwriting. SOX promoted this concept of Chinese walls to minimize